Hello everyone. My name is Elise. Welcome back to my channel. We are going to be doing the first of my little ranking series for the genre fiction that I read the most of in 2022. So there'll be a number of these coming out over the next few weeks. And this one is tier ranking all of the horror books that I read in 2022. Now, if you watched my stats video, which I will link down below, I very shockingly had horror as my second most read genre fiction. So that is wild because I only started reading horror this year. I would explicitly avoid it in previous years. So I only came to it this year and I ended up reading a decent amount. I read 14 horror books in 2022 and I'm gonna go ahead and rank them from my least favorite all the way up until my favorite. I will say, the horror that I like, or that I'm discovering that I like, is very much in the realm of psychological and social horror. So I would say the more traditional horror, I do not read. So at least at this point, I don't read. So that's not what this list is going to be. It's much more social psychological horror. And that's the way that I like it. I'm not in it for the thrills and chills necessarily. I'm in it for the horrific thoughts, you know? So that is what this list is going to consist of. So if you're interested in that, please stick around so you can hear about all these great horror books that I read. So I'm going to start with my least favorite of the year. And this one is already a hot take. Please do not come at me for this. Because I think this was a pretty beloved book and a pretty beloved author as well. It was my first time reading from them, and that is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. Here, I should probably scoot over so the photo can have room to breathe. So yeah, What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This was published by Tor Nightfire. This is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. And that's why I read it. I love that short story from Edgar Allan Poe. It's my favorite work of his. And I was really curious to read a retelling. I haven't read a retelling of it before. And this did not work for me. Hence why it's at the bottom of the list. I have now come to know that T. Kingfisher has a very light and comedic tone to their books. And I didn't know that going in. For me personally, I just don't think it worked for the retelling that I wanted this to be. So I get why other people enjoy it. If you like kind of cozy horror, is that a thing? This works. It's very optimistic in tone. And I just didn't like it. The thing that I loved about the original story is the extremely creepy, unsettling gothic tone of it. And that just wasn't what this book is. So I really missed that. It just felt, I don't know, cheesy to me. There was nothing necessarily wrong with the writing. I thought the pacing was fine and all of that. I didn't love the take that it had on the, I don't know, mysterious thing that's going on. I didn't love that either, but yeah, definitely at the bottom of the list for me, but I know a ton of people loved it, so take it with a grain of salt. All right, next book is Dark Waters. This is by Katherine Arden, and this is published by Putnam Sons Books. And this is the third in the horror quartet that Katherine Arden has been writing. It's a middle grade horror quartet. I think it was decent for what it is, but it's not the best middle grade I've ever read. I do think it's fun to have middle grade horror, and that would have been fun to read when I was that age. I was not reading that at the time. This one ends on a cliffhanger. It's the only one in the series so far that has ended on a cliffhanger. In some ways that makes me want to get to the next one, but in other ways I was like, ugh, man, I wish I would have had some type of resolution. But yeah, I think they're fine for what it is. If you have a middle grade reader in your life that wants to have a fun, adventurous horror, then this is a great pick. So that is Dark waters. The next one I actually own, and that is The Haunting Season. And this is Ghostly Tales for Long Winter Nights. This is a short story collection with various authors, and they're all ghost stories-ish in some way. This was very middling for me, I will say. Two of the stories I really loved, but the rest were just like so mid and kind of forgettable. I don't even remember all of them at this point. My favorite story by far was the one about the Eel Singers. Is that what it's called? Yeah, the Eel Singers by Natasha Pulley. That was my favorite one by far, and I will try and pick up something else from that author. But yeah, it was just kind of all over the place. That story I'll tell you in particular was about this man who has this ability, and a lot of these are fantastical in certain ways. They're like speculative. And he has this ability to see potential outcomes or potential futures. So they're not guaranteed futures, they're just potential options. And a lot of them are seemingly dark, and he's just exhausted. So he goes with his partner and their somewhat adoptive daughter to this place where he has previously experienced that his brain doesn't do this. It doesn't come up with all these scenarios when he's there, and he's not sure what phenomenon is going on there that allows that. So they take a vacation there, and creepy things ensue. It was very atmospheric. I thought it was very clever in the way that the plot unfolded. Yeah, and I really enjoyed that one. I would say if you're looking for something that is about ghosts and like kind of scary stories that are really not going to actually scare you, that are more cozy, then this is a great pick. And it's like very much centered around like autumn, winter, cold nights, sharing stories with people. So if you're looking for something a little bit cozier, I would highly recommend this. And this is published by Sphere. Next one on the list is Through the Woods, and this is published by Margaret Eldery Books. And this is a YA graphic novel. Well, it's a YA graphic short story collection. That's the tongue twister. But it has 6 short stories, I believe, and all of them are really similar to The Haunting Season, where it's telling some type of like horror tale. But obviously it's a graphic novel, so there's lots of pictures to go along with it. I thought this, again, was really well done for what it is. But like it's on the lower half of the list because it ultimately didn't stay with me very much, and this wasn't like spectacular, but it wasn't bad either. So I do think the last story is the best story. That story really shines in the collection, and again, just like so clever the way that it kind of like twists at the end to make something that could be normal very, very dark. So I appreciated that. Yeah, and it was great to have the pictures accompanying this. So to get to see like the colored panels, and it is in color, of these like creepy things that are happening, I very much enjoyed. So if you're looking for a quick, creepy read, then I highly recommend Through the Woods. Number 10 in the tier ranking list is Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark. This is beloved. I know that. I felt disappointed by this. I'm not sure if it was because of the hype. It's not bad by any means. I think it's still good. But for me, yeah, just middling again. And the things I think this did well is it's extremely cinematic, and it follows a group of women who fight Klukuxes, which are demons that inhabit the bodies of people who are extremely bigoted, and they are inhabiting the bodies of KKK members. So they are out hunting them, and like there's a group of badass women trying to do that. But like I said earlier, extremely cinematic. The climactic battle in this would be so fun to watch as a movie, but I just didn't have like a depth and connection to the characters that I really wanted in this type of like hero's journey-esque story. I really wanted to be invested in that main character, and I just didn't quite feel like it pushed me into that enough. I do think some of the transitions from like scene to scene were a little bit jarring, and like it didn't feel as smooth as I wanted it to. But otherwise, I think, you know, this is a very interesting take on bigotry, on systemic racism in America, and, you know, how infectious that really is. So I appreciated it for that and would still recommend picking this up. And this one is published by Tor.com. Number 9 on the list is Valerio. And this one I haven't seen a lot of people picking up this year. That's what the cover looks like. This is published by HaperCollins and written by Xavier, Navarro, Aquino. And this was probably the darkest thing I read on this list. Let me think about that. Yeah, this was the darkest thing that I read on this list by far. This follows a group of children, mostly boys, in the wake of Hurricane Maria, and it takes place in Puerto Rico. It follows a group of children who create this community, kind of like a utopia community, to try and survive. And it's very kind of like Lord of the Flies-ish. Like they're kids who do a lot of things wrong, and they're led by a leader who does not have everyone's best interest at heart. Yeah, this is extremely graphic and gory, so, you know that. And I liked all of the commentary it had on the devastation of the hurricane and how people were really just left to fend for themselves, and the failure that, you know, the US in particular had to respond in a way that was ethical in the wake of that hurricane. That is what I enjoyed. I do think like the writing was done very well. It's just that I don't love following kid narrators in the first place, and like these kind of like psychopath kid narrators, and like the level of disturbing that it was, I was not here for it. I was not feeling it. The misogyny sort of left a bad taste in my mouth, and that's definitely supposed to be there. But just for me personally, I never get a lot out of those stories, because it's like I know I don't need to know. I don't need more in my life. So yeah, I think this is well written, and if those themes sound good to you and you can handle a lot of gore and violence even towards children, then this might be something worth picking up. All right, the next one is not technically classified as horror in Storygraph, but I'm putting it in this list because I firmly believe that it is horror, and that is Mrs. March by Virginia Feito, and this is published by Liverlight. This, like, we're starting to get into like the very middle of the list, so I definitely enjoyed this. This was a 4-star read for me, and would highly recommend. This book follows Mrs. March, whose husband is an author, and his most recent book has come out, and it's an extremely well best-selling book. And she goes to the bakery like she does every day, and the woman that works at the bakery mentions to her casually, like, oh, what do you think of your husband's book? And Mrs. March has not read it. She has long stopped reading her husband's works. Then the cashier person says, like, oh, well, yeah, what do you think about the main character being based off of you? And this has Mrs. March shook, okay? So Mrs. March hasn't read the book, but does know that the main character is basically like an awful woman. And so she starts becoming increasingly paranoid that her husband truly thinks that she is like this woman. She spirals, man, this goes off the rails. So the reason why I would classify this as horror is there is a lot of like psychological horror elements. Like there's paintings that seemingly come alive in grotesque ways. It has an extremely unsettling tone. There is death going on. It really has to do with like, is Mrs. March going insane, or is she just stumbling upon the truth that seems stranger than fiction? So I really enjoyed this. I think it was a fun, wild ride. The ending really gives you a good payoff, and I liked that. Highly recommend if you're into like some psychological, very mysterious type of horror. I definitely enjoyed it. Next one that I read and very much enjoyed was Reprieve, and this is by James Hahn Mattson. This was very popular. It was published by William Morrow, and this is definitely like a psychological horror. It's slow paced and follows a young woman who is Black and is having correspondence with their cousin. I think, don't quote me on that, but I think it's her cousin. Her cousin wants to participate in this full contact escape room, and you win a bunch of money if you're able to make it through, and it's notoriously difficult and hard to make it through. I think only like 1 or 2 groups have done it in the past, but you win like tens of thousands of dollars if you make it through. And that is a part of the storyline, but then you flash back to get these characters, all the characters that do the escape room together, to get their backstories. And you also know that something bad has happened. You just don't know what, because there is a trial going on, and you know that because there are chunks that are posed as transcripts for the trial. So there's a little bit of a mystery of like what has happened, and you do get the reveal of that at the end. But then there's also all this commentary on race in America, on misogyny in America, and like lots of other things going on. There's also some like commentary on academia. So there's lots of things to love about this, lots of themes that I enjoy reading about. And I loved the kind of twisty things at the end to do with the escape room. I thought it was great, and I thought it was doing exactly what it wanted to do, and I would highly recommend if that sounds interesting to you. So that is Reprieve. Next up is another pretty popular one this year, and that's because it was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, and that is Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung. This is translated from the Korean by Anton and published by Hanford Star. This cover is so cool. And this is a short story collection of, horror short stories. And I thought these were so great. Some of these stories have stuck with me to this day, and I read this near the middle of the year, and like some still filter through my mind. So this is so descriptive, and I could visualize everything that was happening, even though it was, not based in reality. And I don't think there was any bad story in here. Of course, I liked some more than others, but I don't think there was anything bad. I pretty much enjoyed all of them. Some of my favorites were Snare, which I know a lot of people love, which focuses on greed and the horrors of greed. There was one that I can't remember which one it was. Maybe it's Goodbye, My Love. It's the long one. Shows kind of like community gaslighting and what fear will make people do. Covers like trauma and the effects of trauma and how that can really negatively impact a person's future behavior. So yeah, so many things to love about this. I think it's really smart. I know a lot of people complain that the first story is too grotesque. I disagree with that. I don't think it was like overly gratuitous in any way. It was gross, but I think it's meant to be gross, and it didn't seem over the top gross, so I don't know. But yeah, I very much recommend this. Really enjoyed Cursed Bunny. We are getting into the top 5, and a few of these I read early in the year, and number 5 on the list is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. So this is the original cover. This is the self-published one that came from Nick's Publishing. There is a new cover now. I'll insert it here so you can see the new cover because it got picked up by another publisher. But this I very much enjoyed. It's a retelling of Dracula's Brides. And this comes from the perspective of one of his brides, his first bride. At the very beginning of the book, you know that Dracula has died, and then we get the story leading up to that. This is all told in letters. It's a long form letter to Dracula explaining what happened. This does so many things really well, plus it's just really good plot. Like there's an interesting plot to follow here. And it really is mostly about what it's like to be in an abusive relationship, and like psychologically abusive and physically abusive. I appreciated that take on a Dracula's Bride's retelling. Liked the like queer polyamory type of vibe going on too, and the dynamics and relationships between all of his spouses as well, as like very heartwarming and heart-wrenching in certain ways. So this is really fun to read. I mean, I'm saying that and it's about abuse, like that part is not fun to read, but the plot is just very enthralling and I couldn't put this down. It's also very short, so definitely recommend this. Add to the voices that encourage you to read this. The next two, for context, were 4 stars, but I will say the next two are the only 2 books this year that I have questioned bumping up the rating to 5 stars, and I hardly ever do that. I've only ever changed a rating on 2 books ever in the past after the fact, but these 2 I have really contemplating changing to 5 stars. So know that I love both of these books. The 4th one is Lakewood, and this is by Megan Giddings, and this is published by Amistad. This I read for Black Weenathon, and oh my god, it was so good. So this follows a woman, what is her name? Lena, whose grandmother dies at the very beginning of the novel, and this puts her and her mother in extreme financial distress. Her mother is unwell and can't work, and so Lena is feeling an extreme amount of pressure to provide for her family. And she gets contacted by a medical testing company saying that she has the opportunity to participate in a medical trial. She goes to the initial day to see if she's eligible and if she's going to make it in, because she can get a lot of money if she participates in the trial. So she goes and makes it in, and she gets sent to Lakewood, which is a town where the medical testing company exists, and starts participating in these trials. And horrific, strange, violent things happen. This does have pretty violent scenes, but they don't feel out of place. They're very much interwoven into this trippy dynamic that is happening. This is another book where it's like you don't know what's real and what's not real. Very much in that like psychological horror vein. What I loved about this book is the take on generational trauma and systemic racism. I thought it was so well done. It was such a unique way that the twist that happened to kind of wrap all of that together. And yeah, I thought the commentary was great, as well as like just so like gripping to read. And yeah, I love the combination of like great plot with also really interesting, important themes when it's done well. So that is definitely happening in this book, and that is Lakewood. So please pick this up if you have not already read it. All right, the next 3 are all books that I read from the library. So number 3 is Comfort Me with Apples, and this is by Katherine and Valente, and it is published by Tor.com. A lot of the books on here are published by Tor because they do a lot of horror. But this is a horror novella that is also a retelling. But if I were to tell you what the retelling is, it would spoil it for you, because you don't understand the retelling until the end. And I think it was fucking brilliant the way that it unfolded what the retelling was. Yeah, I read this at the beginning of the year, and this even slightly more than Lakewood. I have thought about changing this rating so many times. I think that it's just spectacular in what it's doing. It's very short, so like it's very fast paced, but so clever, so clever. And I don't want to give anything away, but it starts out by following a woman who lives in a seemingly perfect community. So she wakes up saying like she has the perfect life, she has the perfect husband, she has the perfect house, blah, 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 blah. And then one day she finds an item in her vanity that does not belong there. And that causes her to start questioning things around her. and we sort of follow her from there. This again, you know, questions what people are willing to do in order to save and protect themselves. This speaks a lot about misogyny, and it's just a fascinating read. It's also so short, so you can read it very quickly. I don't want to say anything else because I don't want to give anything away, but I highly encourage you to pick this up. I think it's fantastically done, and I have a couple other Katherine and Valentes on my reading list now, just because this was so dang good. So that is Comfort Me with Apples. Number 2 and number 1, you will have seen on my best books of the year. So number 2 is Women Eating by Khoda. And this is a modern vampire story. It's published by HaperCollins, and this follows a woman who is half vampire, half Japanese. And she is for the first time living without her mother. Her mother is unwell and is now in sort of an assisted living type of facility. And her mother is the vampire half of her, and she is now struggling to find blood on her own. So she's basically starving. She's also an artist, so there's lots of good commentary on art and all the gatekeeping that is done in that world. But really, this is an extended metaphor on disordered eating, and sort of the extreme self-loathing that she has that is very much inherited from her mother. And I think that was done really well at showing how disordered eating is really commonly passed down, particularly from women to women through the generations. But it can also happen with men, but particularly from like mothers to daughters, and how nefarious it can be when you are constantly self-loathing about yourself and when your kids pick up on that. And if you hate yourself, what are they supposed to think of them? And it's really questioning that. It's also questioning, how do you unravel all these intersectionalities of your identity when you're out on your own and start forming your own thoughts, feelings, beliefs on things? There's just so many things happening right here. And above all, I think it handles the extended metaphor of disordered eating really well. And it's a very nuanced description. This is a very slow novel, incredibly richly descriptive. Even the passages of her like lying on the floor of her apartment, I can visualize so well. So highly encourage you to pick this up if this sounds interesting. Again, the plot is slow, so I want to be like forthcoming with that. But if that's okay with you and this stuff sounds interesting, I would highly encourage you to pick it up. So that is Woman Eating. And the top horror book that I read this year, which might not be a surprise to any of you, is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is published by Picador, and so many people are singing its praises this year, and I'm so glad because it is a fantastic novel. So this is also a short novel, and it follows 2 women, Leah and Miri, and they are married. And Leah is a marine biologist. She is going on a deep sea mission. So she's going down in a submarine to the seafloor. What is supposed to be a 6-week trip turns into a 6-month trip. And during that time, there's no contact with anyone else above land. So Miri, her wife, is back home sort of questioning what has happened to Leah, because there's been no contact and they haven't been back in 6 months. That's how it starts out. And then Leah does come back, and Leah has changed. And I don't want to give away the ways that she has changed, but for me, again, this book is all about trauma and the physical effects of trauma, in addition to the relational effects of trauma that can happen in someone's life. And it shows these 2 women struggling to figure out what their relationship means now that Leah has come back changed, and how do they handle this. I think it wonderfully showed the complications that can happen when you go through something traumatic and your physical body is not the same, and how that manifests itself. And also, like, you're just fundamentally not the same person sometimes. Some people, you can be like, you do work, you come back, like, it's fine. But some people fundamentally change, and there is no going back. And what happens when you're a different person in some ways, and now you're not compatible to be in a relationship with this person that you love deeply. It's heartbreaking, and I just loved it for being like such a real depiction on the page of what it's like to be in a struggling relationship with someone whom you love but also don't recognize anymore. Oh, it's so good. I highly recommend people read it. The horror elements of this take place with Leah on the submarine. You get flashbacks to what actually happened down there, and that is the majority of the horror elements. There are some when she returns, but that's the bulk of it. And that is sort of a mysterious element of like slowly getting more information unfolding to the reader of what happened while she was under the sea. Again, this is not like super plot dramatic wise, but I do think it has twists and turns. It's just like a quieter tone to it. And that, my friends, is my horror ranking 2022 video. I hope you enjoyed. I wore my spooky, scary cat shirt just for this. And yeah, let me know if you've read any of these or are interested in reading any of these. And let me know if you have any psychological and social horror recommendations for me. I really want to know them. I want to read more. I enjoyed reading these so much and don't know what all there is out there because I am brand new to the horror community. Let me know your recommendations down below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.